program, but also we know that several of the participants that join us on Tuesdays and these days Thursdays as well are also just joining us, not just as part of the certificate program, but listening into very intriguing conversations, but also very thought-provoking reflections that are being shared in these spaces. And so we're really happy that you could take time and be available to join us again today. And just a bit of housekeeping before we will start off, just to remind you that it's always great to see some faces. So yes, please turn on your cameras if you would like to, but otherwise we ask. Hello, Miss Grace, very nice to see you there. Hope you're doing well in the Philippines, joining us, dedicated as usual. And so we're looking forward to reflections coming in from you later on. Anastasia, we see you. Chioma, you are welcome. So it's great to see some faces, and we just ask that your microphones remain muted while we'll have the panel discussion running through. And, just as always, once again, to thank all the various organizations that are behind the webinar series. So many thanks to the Cross-Regional Center for Refugees and Migrants, CCRM, the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, the International Institute for Migration and Development, and we have a panelist coming from there today, the Metropolis Asia Pacific, and the Migrant Forum in Asia. Thank you very much for the dedication and support. Can't believe we've come along this far. Objective number 18, where we're going to be looking at skills development and recognition. And I think it's a topic that we have touched on, I think, in various discussions around the GCM itself. We have also managed, I think, to unpack, I think, elements that either touch on skills development or recognition. We've touched on vulnerabilities, and I think there's a lot of connection to that. We've touched on things such as legal pathways. We were looking at inclusion and social cohesion not too long ago, last week, if I'm not even mistaken. So it's a good juncture for us to reach at this point. And maybe just a reminder of what GCM 18 on skills development and recognition talks about. And it says, and I'll read the commitment from the text, and it says that we commit to invest in innovative solutions that facilitate mutual recognition of skills, qualifications, and competences of migrant workers at all skills levels, and promote demand-driven skills development to optimize the employability of migrants in formal labor markets in countries of destination and countries of origin upon return, as well as to ensure decent work in labor migration. And so even as we pick on that, as I said, I think we have touched on, various aspects of this and what it means. But today, we're really glad that we have an able panel that will not only touch on various aspects of what skills development and recognition looks like today from their own spaces and areas of expertise, but also make the various linkages to other GCM objectives. And as usual, the inspiration behind this is for us not just to socialize, as we often say, the GCM, but to actually to be able to feed into the GCM discussions, because we do know that everything is happening from the local. So how does the local feed the global? And indeed, what are those kind of disconnections that we see between this very important, though non-binding global initiative and global framework that has a lot of gathering and cloud, particularly as we go towards the IMRF in May, but also what actually is happening on the ground. What are we hearing, not just, at the national spaces, at the sub-national spaces, and also in the local municipalities and in local spaces. So it will be, we'll be diving into some of these, into these areas, but also looking into spaces where there is mobility that has been organized in forms of partnerships, where regions wanting to come together and regions, wanting to engage in terms of labor migration. and also talking about spaces where we're talking about undocumented migration and understanding is there a space for skills development and recognition, indeed, even in that space. So some kind of turns that we will make today. I see in the chat that somebody has mentioned that they cannot hear my voice. Can somebody confirm if this is,
It is clear.
Can you hear me?
It is clear.
It is clear? All
I
right.
hear you.
I can hear
Super.
you.
Super. I wanted to make sure that it was not like being on radio where you don't really know if people can hear you or not. So no, so great, great to be able to that everybody can hear me. So for today's discussion, so I'll be your moderator, and I'm Padis Younger-Knudsen, Vice President of GRFDT, and but most importantly, we have a panel of 3 speakers today. We have Akhil, who is joining us, who's a research fellow at the International Institute of Migration and Development, and that's based in India. That's doing important work in Asia, but in other parts as well. We have Jennifer Tangney, who is the Senior Project Manager for the Mobility Partnership Facility with ICMPD. And we're glad that ICMPD has been supportive in terms of just, providing different panelists, but also that colleagues of ICMPD have also been with us to join and just share a lot of reflections of their work, but a lot of, deliberating some of the challenges. So Jennifer, we're really glad that you're here to join us today. And we have Bim Shrestha. Bim, please let me know if I've pronounced your name correctly. And Bim is with an organization. Super. Is with an BIM is from an organization known as Shramik Sanjal, and we will be hearing more about their work there. And just putting directly Akhil on the spot from the research space. We know Akhil, we know that the audience is very familiar here with you from GRFDT, but I think it's still worth us giving an intro, and we will be hearing, I think, more from you in terms of the work that you are doing as a research lead at the Center for Indian Migrant Studies. And we also know that you have worked as a research consultant with the Migrant Forum in Asia, which is one of the organizers of this GCM series. And Akim's research interests are labor migration, international migration governance, comparative governance, and political economy. And he's been pursuing a PhD in applied economics from the Center for Development Studies. And he has indeed written quite extensively on various issues of migration development. Akhil, we're really glad that you could, find time to join us here today, and putting you straight on the spot so that as we start this conversation today, and we know that some of your work, for instance, on migration in the Global South has looked particularly at inter-regional mobility within Asia and Africa. Could you just sort of speak to us around some of the challenges that you see in terms of establishing skill mobility schemes, that should be benefiting all stakeholders? And here we're talking about, putting migrant workers in the center and trying to understand that in the context of labor migration in the Global South. And here as well, if you could unpack for us, what you really see as some of those sticky challenges that emerged during the pandemic. Akhil, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, MFA, GRFDT, and all other organizers for the opportunity to share my thoughts again in this platform. And, we are discussing the objective on skilling, during a time when the discourse on skilling itself is undergoing, a lot of scrutiny, or it's inviting larger discussions. The discourse of skilling for the migrants in the Global South itself is stuck with the notion of the short-term training-based training programs that are supposed to empower the migrants. And, that is a common or platform or common scenario when it comes to skilling or, skill upgradation, etc., and whatever related to skilling. And recently, during the pandemic, we have witnessed a large-scale return of migrants, especially to the, large countries of origin such as India. where the states actually failed to incorporate skilling as a major strategy for reintegration, or skilling as a major aspect of reintegration. When we see these two aspects, placing skilling just as a short-term training program, and the state's failure to include proper skilling in the policy making, actually create some kind of discussion. Okay. Yeah. Can I continue? Hello. Hello. Hello.
You can go ahead. Sorry about that interruption, Akhil.
Okay. So in this context, it's very important to discuss, why stakeholders are yet to reach the full potential when we think about scaling, because it's in the limelight for the last 2 decades or so, and at least in the past 1 decade we are kept on discussing about skilling and about the new skills sets that should be developed, especially in the international migration scenario. And since my research focuses on the mainly on the South Asia Gulf corridor, so I'll be mostly citing examples from this region. And as Paddy rightly pointed out, we are familiar with some general and macro challenges that are already there. We all are familiar with certain macro challenges, such as the absence of state-to-state skill mobility agreements that could enhance the recognition of skills, and also the absence of infrastructure that could promote skill training, and also the affordability concerns are there when it comes to the financial aspects. And again, the coordination between we could say state and non-state stakeholders is also an issue. And also the lack of documentation of skills, especially for the returnees and when it comes to reintegration. These are the common challenges we discuss, and we are discussing this for ages, and we are yet to reach a solution to how to address these challenges. That is there one thing, and we're almost 3 years since the GCM objectives are passed, and we are, as you rightly pointed out, IMRF is coming up, and we are still thinking, and we hardly see any new mobility agreements between the countries of origin and major countries of destination, at least in the global south. When we think all these things, I mean, I don't think we should keep on discussing about this larger macro challenges, and we should actually start thinking, should break these stereotypes and start thinking about, some specific challenges that are there and that are seriously affect the the entire notion of skilling. And one of the major drawbacks of the skilling or skill discourse is the lack of right-based skilling. There is no right-based skilling aspect, or right-based skilling is not part of the curriculum or the framework of skilling of major countries of origin, and there is no such effort by the countries of destination when it comes to upskilling, etc. That is a major challenge that is yet to discuss by the stakeholders, especially by the state countries of origin and countries of destinations. And another challenge could be the lack of continuous learning that could help these migrants to empower throughout their migration journey. What I'm trying to say is that from the period of recruitment and until the stage of return, skilling should actually promote the continuous learning that could help these migrants to gain several skills at several stages of migration. And such an approach is also lacking. And unlike the right-based skilling, the lack of continuous learning is also a major drawback of the existing skilling framework. And I'll try to point out 2 more specific challenges. Then I'll stop here and I'll try to cite some examples later on. And another challenge, we have been discussing this thing. I mean, the minimal certification. Minimal certification is a major drawback of the skilling discourse for a long period of time. But the minimal certification and also the mutual recognition of non-technical sector, especially the soft skills, because we really need to discuss this, because majority of the migrants who are outside the skill discourse are part of this group. So we are yet to find or develop any kind of certification or proper certification setup or framework for the non-technical group, and especially the soft skill people that could affect the women and domestic workers and other low skill migrant workers. And as I said earlier, finally, the reintegration, the role of skilling in reintegration, we have again witnessed during the pandemic how important is skilling for the reintegration of migrant workers. And but there are examples like we could say South Korea has employment permit system, and Philippines also attempted several times to establish some kind of return skills. To develop some kind of skill training for the returning migrants, etc. But beyond that, there is no such efforts by the countries of origin or countries of destination to include, reintegration as a priority in the skilling framework. So I'm going to stop here. And so we should actually, when we think about, the nuances of skill mobility partnership agreements and failures, we should actually think in this line also when we have a kind of a platform like this where a lot of young academics, activists, and even policymakers are also part of. So yeah, I'm stopping here.
Akhil, thank you very much for that. And it's great that, on the panel as well, we'll be talking about, we'll be looking at different types of mobility partnerships. So, some of your reflections, I guess we'll also, touch on to other speakers, particularly looking at Jennifer's work, where she, that's kind of the focus of her work at ICMPD. And I just wanted to have, kind of a comeback question to you. So when we talk about, we often talk about the role of multi-stakeholder partnerships, right, in skilling, and it's as though that of course we know that we need to involve civil society organizations, we need to involve the private sector, and you've brought in a very important point there. We're talking about a rights-based skilling, and I'm really thinking how feasible would that be in the context of this multi-stakeholder partnerships? How feasible is that when we look at, let's say, that the influence and the power of the employer? So I may feel that I have the right skills. So let's say especially for migrants with low skills, right? That it's the power still sits in the hand of the employer. So actually, can we really have a rights-based approach to skilling when the power to employ, when the power still lies, and there are gaps, for instance, in the national system, and whether we're looking at returns or whether we're looking at migrants that are actually starting off their first journeys, and also in spaces where you don't have mobility partnerships, you don't have space for circular work, or you don't have space for seasonal work. So there is no kind of a binding document or a bilateral agreement that kind of covers you. So you would feel comfortable to say, yes, I do have, at least the minimal, as you have talked about, these minimal requirements. So what is the feasibility that you sort of see in this space of this multi-stakeholder partnerships to go towards this rights-based approach in skilling?
Yeah, okay. So there are two aspects in response to what you're saying. So, when we think about giving more power to the employer, or employer has more power, so I think it's again time to think about a holistic approach where there are more inclusiveness happens. I mean, employers are normally considered as outside the skilling framework. Only in certain cases, only at the destination countries, employers have a certain role in upskilling and etc. And when they have a role, they have a role in choosing the people with particular skills. That is there. That power they have. But at the same time, the role of state and other actors such as recruitment agencies also have a huge role. I'm just keeping civil society aside for now. I'll come to that later. So proper negotiation between the recruitment agents and government, because recruitment agents, if a proper partnership develops, then there won't be any issues such as absence of minimum wage, and if there is a proper contract that can be ensured between these three actors, then I don't think then we can actually nullify the influence the employer has. Because if a recruitment agency and government, a country of origin government, try to develop a kind of a proper framework to have a contract that actually protect the rights of the migrant workers, then the influence of employer will always come down, because anyway he or she wants the employer, the employee with some skills, some particular skills. And if there are certain agreement contracts or clauses from the countries of origin or from this side of the migration, then that will always nullify the, not nullify, I mean, that will reduce the power of employer. And next thing is the role of civil society. So let me quickly cite an example. I mean, civil society could play, but I mean, a number of roles. And as you said it rightly, when there is no mobility partnership, etc., civil society could, actually educate or, ensure the access to skills for migrants group, especially the vulnerable migrants group. In Kerala, a provincial state in India where half of the household has a migration experience. The government tried to find, tried to find applicants for a training program for the domestic workers. They tried again, but it didn't happen. Then they finally had to approach the civil society, and civil society easily, managed to reach out to the applicants or those who are the needy, those who need the skills, and help the government to conduct the training program, because they waited for 3 months to identify the the participants for the training program. Just citing an example, because civil society could ensure the access to skills, and civil society also could help the migrants influence the choice and the decision of the migrant workers at the grassroots level. That is where I find an important role civil society could play. And also advocacy level, we all know that how influential could be the civil society, especially in countries like Bangladesh, where they have a huge role in improving the technical schools, or they have with the BMET. And also in Sri Lanka, we have seen that TVET and SLBFE are always consider, always develop partnership with the civil society. Yeah. Okay. Over. Yeah.
Akhil, thank you very much. Sorry, after so long of being on Zoom, sometimes one forgets to mute themselves. But thank you for that response. And I think it's kind of, for us, it's also very important to get a sense, I think, of what is realistic. And I think that when we have come into these conversations about the GCM, it's as though that the GCM already, with some of the actions, for instance, that it has outlined in terms of skills recognition, sometimes may ignore some of the challenges, or the fact that, where does the power lie, or who is holding the pen and taking some of these decisions. So I think some of the spaces where you've pointed out, and I think it's quite clear, where we sort of see a very obvious role for governments. And I like, for instance, the reference that you have made in terms of sending countries or rather also homelands in sort of considering the space for also a skilling. And you said it in the response to the first question, where you also talked about learning being continuous. So where do we also look at the point of learning, and actually, are we skilling enough for return? So I think this is one of the things I think we'd like to give you as a food for thought, as we, give you a break and move on to the next speaker. But when we come back, it would really be interesting to hear about some very specific examples where, particularly in the Global South, where we see that there, migrants are moving from, one Global South country to another. I don't like the term Global South, but until we find something new, we're kind of a bit stuck with what we have to use right now, so everyone can understand. With migrants moving between countries. And I mean, your examples could also come from other spaces as well, more advanced economies and moving to less to developing countries. Where do we really see these examples where they're saying, yes, we know that the returns, we're estimating that returns will be of such a nature, and therefore we are investing into skilling our migrants, whether it's sending countries talking about this, meaning that their homelands, so their governments are interested, or it's also host countries saying, we're ready to invest basically in a retirement that's not going to happen in this particular space. So sounds all a bit dreamy, but maybe there are some examples that you want to come back and talk to us about in terms of how we can unpack this one. But then thanks again for sharing your reflections. And just as we will move on to our next speaker, I think we are also really glad that, as already mentioned before, that ICMPD would be is joining us again today. And we have Jennifer, who is the Senior Project Manager leading the Mobility Partnership Facility, which is a 50 million euro program that is supporting the external dimension of EU's migration policy. And so, the project works very closely with EU member states. There are some priority countries in the partnership, whether it's in the eastern part, and she will explain a bit more on that on the African side. But I think also very important to talk about, Jennifer's extensive work as a development sector professional with a lot of experience with donors, civil society, engaging in the governance field, and also kind of looking at how things start, all the way from formulation, trying to look at capacity building, which is a very important topic here that we're talking about as well today, but also kind of looking at spaces in terms of leadership and so on. And so, Jennifer, we're really glad that you're joining us today. We know that, your work predominantly is looking at these mobility partnerships, and, what are they? But we wanted to have a moment and where we just zoom in for those of us who may not be aware. Can you unpack some of the concepts that we have, around mobility schemes, and tell us about some of the, pilot projects that you have between EU partners, member states rather, and some of the partner countries, and highlighting for us some of the challenges that you see in this skills and matching. And our last question then would be to you: what challenges do migrants face, on recognition of their qualifications? Over to you, Jennifer.
Great, thank you very much. And can I say it's my first time to join this group, and it's really nice to see so many participants, and more diversity than I'm used to when I'm working with EU member states, who are my main cohort. So it's good to be here today. So indeed, my background has been, well, I have a doctorate in peace building and many years working with civil society. And evolved to take on a role with the Migration Partnership Facility, because I felt it's at this very interesting location between the EU member states, who have the migration power, they have the visas to offer, the kind of aspirational policy dimension with the European Commission, looking at the talent partnerships, and then pragmatically looking at those migrants who either want to move or feel forced to move. So it's a really interesting program. The Migration Partnership Facility used to be called the Mobility Partnership Facility, but now we don't focus only on mobility partnership countries anymore. So we don't have any geographic limitation, except that the country that's being prioritized has to be a strategic interest for EU member states. So in theory, we're open globally, but of course we know that in reality, very often, those closer to home are the ones that traditionally receive a lot of attention. So the MPF has quite a broad mandate, looking at all of the external parts to the EU's migration policy. So anything from borders to migration management, to trafficking, to smuggling. But one of the areas where we have taken a particular interest over the past few years has been on these mobility schemes. And starting with these pilot projects, we started with 4 projects that are now either all closed or in a closure period, and looked at how is it that EU member states can better engage in mobility schemes with partner countries in a way that is more reinforcing of the relationship, and in a way that mitigates the challenges of brain drain, or the kind of fiscal drain that goes with training nurses or training engineers and seeing them leave. So the pilot projects basically operate through grants to EU member states targeting 1 or more countries. We do also have examples of multiple member states joining in for a labour mobility scheme. And through the grant funds, it offers a little bit of space to the member states and partner countries to innovate, to take a little bit of risk, to try something new. And so the ideas of these schemes are really to generate learning, to generate experience, and to ideally become scalable and sustainable and to spin out, but also in their own way to offer examples for how to engage with third countries. So the overall framework that the EU is now discussing in the new pact is one linked to talent partnerships. So these are intended to be ways of engaging in skills, investment, and mitigating the concerns of sending countries while also addressing the needs of the EU labour market. So it's supposed to be this integrated approach looking at skills and providing legal pathways, quality legal pathways that could be anything from circular mobility for skills upgrade to education to permanent migration. So it's really quite a broad grouping of kind of mobilities that could take place both under our projects, but also in the future talent partnerships. And I mean, if we look at the kinds of projects that the MPF has funded over the years, I mean, we have, for example, Digital Explorers, which was a project between Lithuania and Nigeria. I don't know who was more surprised at how this partnership worked. I think the Nigerians had to Google to find out at times where Lithuania was and to figure out, what kind of a country it was. And I think for the Lithuanians, some of these are small SMEs in Lithuania, and it really challenged them to internationalize overnight by having Nigerian staff. So the program looked to enhance Nigerian IT specialist skills and competencies and to offer employment opportunities, but also a circular path for those to go back and be reintegrated with support into the economy in Nigeria. And the program has had two different tracks. The first track was, let's say, kind of open market, and it ended up being very heavily male. And in order to redress this, there was a second track that more specifically also targeted female ICT specialists. Both tracks gave rise to a lot of learning on not only, do you need to look at skills as in, I am a Python programmer, but you also need to look at the soft skills around that individual in order to make it a successful integration. And you need to look on the receiving side in that company at the cultural changes that the staff and management will have to go through. So in some ways, recognizing the hard skills is one step, but for a successful match, in the end, you need flexibility and change on both sides. So, I mean, I think in the Nigerian-Lithuania example, the skills in the ICT sector at this higher end are slightly more straightforward. But even there, they did have to, make some adjustments. What we see in other schemes, so we have another scheme called Move Green, which is between Andalusia in Spain and Morocco. And that's looking at a circular mobility that promotes networking and professional training in the green economy and renewable energy. And so they're looking at vocational skill enhancement, looking at renewables, and exchanges between businesses to try and increase investment potential in both directions. But what we're seeing in that context is that because it's a vocational education framework, it's very little equivalency. It's very difficult to do the skills matching. And so what the program is doing is actually bringing people together in Morocco so that, outside of what may be skills on paper, people are able to break down and have that human engagement because this kind of interaction enables people to see potential along with the skills. That is in its very early days, and it has still 30 months to implement, but we'll be keeping a close eye on how this human engagement, this bringing people together at this early matching stage, changes that dynamic. Maybe if I can, Patty, give another two little examples of new schemes. We have Portugal and India. Portugal recently signed a labour mobility agreement with India. That was last year. And that agreement has, some very large aspirations that there could be recruitment for any kind of work activity, regardless of the duration of the employment, and that there would be the same rights and protections as for Portuguese workers. But the agreement does not really look at the nitty-gritty on the practical measures. So how would you overcome the challenges in the recognition of vocational education and training in particular? So ICMPD is working with the Portuguese authorities, Indian authorities, and other partners in India to undertake a feasibility and design for how this recognition can take place, and how skills, especially recognition of prior learning and soft skills, might be incorporated in the approach. So we're hoping through this that there will be a learning piece that will be of use more broadly than only this scheme, because the challenges will be the same. And this is a little bit where also at EU level, it really is quite difficult, because each government does its own recognition when it comes to vocational education and training. There isn't this Lisbon Agreement, this Bologna process like there is for higher education. So it means that it's always quite labor intensive, in that it needs to be a country by country approach. That is until now. Because Germany is looking at vocational education and training across a whole range of approaches. They're looking at adaptation training in Germany. They're looking at occupational training in Germany as well, where the whole training and this upskilling is done in Germany. But they're also looking at this training in the country of origin. And Germany is at the moment looking in 2 African countries at a global skills partnership type approach, where the actual vocational education would take place in country at a level of skill that's going to be recognized by Germany through a mutual recognition agreement. So this is where we're hoping that we might be able to leverage the kind of apprenticeship qualifications framework that Germany has, which is similar in some other countries, be it Austria, Poland, the Netherlands, so that there might be some scale or some easier method for recognition. And then my last example, really last, is the Bertelsmann Stiftung, a German think tank and research body, has developed a tool called MySkills. And that's been tested and applied for the recognition of non-formalized skills and competencies with refugees in Germany. And now they're looking with the Federal Employment Agency in Germany at how it could be used in the construction sector between Spain and North Rhine-Westphalia, and also externally. So this tool is really looking at the recognition of prior learning and looking at people that have uncertified skills that need to be put within some framework. So there's a lot of different kinds of things happening. I think EU member states recognize that they have a demographic necessity to overcome some of these skill challenges. But at the same time, they realize that in order to maintain constructive partnerships, that they need the investment to be according to an empowering approach for the third countries. So the skills they invest in are aligned to sectors of economic growth for the partner country as much as for the labor market in the EU. So I think there's a maturing of those relationships that's foreseen in the talent partnership, and certainly in the MPF is part of the approach for the projects that we support.
Thank you, Jennifer, for just adding a lot of context, I think, to these speaking about the work that ICMPD is doing, and also speaking very specific to some country examples and giving us a visual of what that looks like. I'm just wondering, as a migrant, so let's say I'm from Morocco or I am from Nigeria, and I know that some of your projects are at kind of at the end of a pilot stage. How do migrants, so coming to another GCM objective, which talks about information, how does that information kind of really get roped into the sending country itself, so that that information is available for those migrants who would have that type of skill? How is that information also roped into, let's say, migration and development programs, that particular countries would have? And the reason why I kind of bring this up, I'm recalling some of the very important work, for instance, that happens in the middle of bilateral agreements. So, for instance, when China has labor for Chinese chefs. In Germany, for instance, you've got an organization of Chinese chefs that are based in Germany that kind of also try to mobilize not just information that goes to migrants coming in, but also it seems that there's a mechanism back home before migrants would leave China, so that their certification centers, for instance. The same would apply for nurses going to Austria or going to Poland, and for that matter, going to other spaces. And we're seeing also this new trend of partnership agreements coming up, for instance, for health professionals, particularly in the United Kingdom, that is seeking more nurses, that is seeking more professionals. So how do migrants get wind of this information from your side? So kind of just bringing that spin up, and then maybe also if you can rope this answer together with talking a little bit more about kind of the gender considerations. I know you talked about, for instance, the example that you have given in the second track, that you have this targeting. Even when you have the targeting, do you get the responses that we're looking for in the absence of sort of a longer term legal pathway, where we're sort of saying we're only looking for seasonal workers who would come for 1 year or 2 years, knowing that usually female migrants would be still heads of households, or would need some kind of permission that would come from families for them to be able to make these moves. So kind of just opening a bit of the box for you there, Jennifer.
Pandora's box. I think you asked very good questions. Through the MPF, it's the EU member state that manages the relationship. But actually, in all of these pilot projects, be it from Slovakia with Moldova, be it from Italy with Tunisia, Morocco, it's a really complex ecosystem of actors that is involved in making these happen. So, you may have municipal governments on both sides, you may have public employment systems, you may have universities, and it really depends on the kind of cohort of worker, what approach is taken. So in the main, and depending on the country, it is through public employment services, through professional associations, and through, even at times, LinkedIn, Facebook, through social media, that awareness raising is done of these opportunities. And, in order to know about a pathway, I suppose there is a certain level of technological integration that individual needs. So they need to be themselves looking and proactively engaged. But I think, moving forward, particularly when looking at this vocational education level, new channels will have to be identified. And as the EU is looking for, people in the caring professions, etc., there may have to be more innovation and more engagement with diaspora associations and civil society on both sides. We actually did do a study recently on the role of diaspora linked to the talent partnerships, and both something that Akil mentioned in terms of reintegration. Diaspora was seen to be a key player there, and we certainly see with our projects that there's a lot of investment in the projects for this reintegration phase, to make sure that people who are coming back are not perceived as having failed, but as having made a choice, being successful in their reintegration. When it comes to the gender balance, again, it really depends at a sectoral level, because on the ICT side, I have to say we were quite surprised that, in Nigeria, that free market became this very male-dominated group. And in the end, it was actually an approach was taken with slightly less experienced women to invest in more upskilling prior to their departure. And I would say more than 50% have stayed on in Lithuania and have chosen to continue their careers there for the time being. Others have come back and have received really strong integration support to identify either entrepreneurial activities, if that's what they wanted, or to secure employment. We are also funding a scheme called Wafira, which is looking at the seasonal worker program between Spain and Morocco, the GECO program, and looking at how, for women who have been perhaps on multiple cycles of this, and how to empower them for out-of-season sustainability and viability of careers, and eventually to be self-sufficient, to be able to withdraw from the program and not continue on the seasonal work. So it's a very interesting project that's being led by the Spanish government with ILO and with a huge range of cooperative partners on both sides. And it's looking to empower women to set up their own businesses so that they can sustain themselves beyond kind of subsistence between seasonal cycles, and eventually to set up cooperatives so that they don't need to do this work if they choose. So, I mean, I think we do try to look at where there is interest at this gendered approach, but at the same time, I think because the gender considerations are so different across each country, there is no one size fits all, and we have to try and ensure that with the member state, it's factored in at the design stage for each country.
Thank you for that. And indeed, you know, like you have said, the gender dimensions are very different. And I think another thing that we've learned in other spaces, so for instance, when we talked about the need for information, one of our panelists was from an organization that was providing female migrants and migrants and refugees in Germany with access to information. And it was an interesting reflection that while sometimes women, for instance, are packaged in terms of, having low skills, they did find quite a niche of those who would have high skills. And one visible way of seeing this was that they were just not showing up during working hours, for instance, to come and get information from an information center, because they were just, up doing other types of work. And also the nature of the kind of information that they were looking for, which was much more sophisticated compared to the kind of information they got in reception centers. So indeed, these considerations have to go to different levels of kind of picking research or picking, and also just being much more observant, I think, of the migrant groups that are there. But thanks again for sharing with us. And I'm just, a reflection point coming back to you, maybe when we come around again. You talked about My Skills, and I guess that there are probably other initiatives like this the German think tank have been working on. And I'm also, I recall that UNESCO, I think, has a passport or for recognition of qualifications for migrants. And I think there is also within Europe itself the European Qualifications passport for refugees. And this seems to be a project that's kind of a bit wider. You've got the Council of Europe involved, and in certain spaces you have sort of a for this particular project, you've got quite a number of stakeholders that are engaged in this. And so my question also on this comes in terms of, are we really out of spaces to recognize passports? Why is it that if I am a migration expert, people will just accept my CV to be a migration expert? They probably will ask for a reference. But why do refugees, why do migrants without of a certain skill type have to be attached to a particular special type of qualifications passport or an app that has to justify for them to get this mutual recognition? And so it's sort of this conversation between expert, and this type of skill. So I leave it to you to kind of digest, Jennifer, sorry to put you on the spot there in terms of thinking of all these things that we come up with, and yet they apply to some and not to everyone. But again, thank you for sharing your reflections. And I think it's also a good time for us to listen to our other panelists who's joined us. So BIM is from Shramik Sanjal, and it's a membership-based worker-led network of migrant workers, most of them who are low-income migrant workers in the Gulf states and in Malaysia. And it's a voluntary network that really aspires to lift the voice of the voiceless, and they do education activities. There's some empowerment activities, as well as supporting migrant workers and doing a lot of advocacy work, looking at ensuring that their rights to live with dignity and work in decent and safe conditions when they are out seeking better livelihoods. So BIM, we're really happy that you're here with us. And I guess, for us, one of the things that we would like to hear, because we know that you yourself a former migrant worker, so that story for us is is reflective, I think, not just of your organization, but of the important work that you have been doing. So as you run us through, what you've prepared to to share with us today, it would also be interesting to hear. We've heard from Jennifer, we've heard from Akil as well, who's particularly been doing some work around the region that you are engaged in from your organization. So for us, it's also, just to say, how when we think about these different reflections that are coming out, and when we think about the ambitions that Shramik Sanjal has in terms of educating and empowering Nepalese migrant workers particularly, and supporting them with knowledge, supporting them with skills and confidence, how does it actually, how do you do this? How do you manage to operationalize this different from, from what Jennifer has talked to us about? How does it look like in the world for migrants in Nepal and also in the destination countries where you have worked? And maybe you can also just chip in and tell us a bit about, who is supporting the core work around your organization as well. Over to you, Bim.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Patty, and all the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share some of the work that Shramik Sanjal has been doing. You can hear me properly, right? Sorry, because I lost the connection.
Yes, we can hear you, Bim.
And
we can hear you.
Okay,
we can
good.
hear
Thank
you.
you.
Go ahead.
Thank you for confirming. Actually, I lost the connection in between, and I was struggling to reconnect back to, and I missed some of the portion of Jennifer's, Jennifer's presentation. So I'm sorry for that, but now it's okay. Everything's okay. So, I'll just give you a little bit of the intro about Shramik Sanjal that you have already given. But before going to what Shramik Sanjal has been doing in terms of empowering migrant worker or educating or skilling the migrant worker, Nepalese migrant worker. So basically, Shramik Sanjal is a one very informal and a loose network of Nepalese migrant worker who we initiated a conversation around what Nepalese migrant worker is particularly going through the different situation in the Middle East and Malaysia. So we gather like 5 to 6 members at the initial time and discuss around these issues over like Facebook and social media. And we came up with the idea that maybe we as a migrant worker being ourselves maybe can do some little to support our Nepalese migrant workers. So we form one small network, which is called Shramik Sanjal. That means worker network. And recently, in mid of 2020, we registered our organization in Nepal as non-profit organization. So we are kind of now transitioning from our informal way of doing things to the formal way. And there are certain things that we actually not expert of. So we are still, in a transition to kind of mold our idea from informal network to formal institution and formal organization. And we are doing this since we registered to Nepalese government as a non-profit organization. So now coming back to your question regarding how Shramik Sanjal actually operationalize our idea of skilling and skilling the migrant worker. So basically, do not get confused about the idea of skilling and scaling up or empowerment from maybe from the broader aspect or the global aspect or the civil society aspect. But we as a migrant worker, what we felt is that there is a lack of information. There is a lack of so many things, a lack of information that we are not being able to have and not being able to access to. That's why we thought of giving the very basic information about the social well-being or the physical well-being or the personal well-being of migrant worker. And we even felt that the empowerment doesn't want to be meant to have proper skill or the education or something like that, but also to have the opportunity to feel that self-belonging within our community and within our society. So we started building that a kind of mechanism to have a community or have the space to share our feeling and share our emotion and share our stories within us that we feel most comfortable to share with us, so that kind of give us a sense of belonging to our society. And that is also, we think, that is one empowerment, that people at least have a chance to kind of share their stories and their suffering, or let's say their feeling and self-belonging. So that is one model. And what we are doing is that we are running couple of Facebook Live that to ensure that Nepalese migrant workers have access to information. So when we started the Facebook Live to give some information about that, about the social well-being and physical well-being of migrant workers, then there were so many migrant workers that joined in our Facebook page and then Facebook Live, and we have around 28,000 Nepalese migrant workers join in our Facebook page. So we frequently run the Facebook Live and give very basic information about do's and don'ts and cultural differences and something like that, so they can feel very comfortable with that, that they have this kind of information from Samik Sanjal as we are their fellow friends, right? So these are the things. And apart from that, we are also doing some kind of right-based what is called that training, let's say empowerment model through the in-person training that we do in every single day or every single week or every single month. But once in a year, when we have the opportunity to travel back to our country during the their annual leave or something like that, we organize some gatherings with our community member and our Samik Sanjal member, and gather in one location or in Kathmandu, let's say in Nepal, and we run the training on communication and advocacy, and doing small research or storytelling and something like that. And we also utilize that time during our annual leave when we come to Nepal for celebration or to have quality time with our family member. Then we organize those kind of training to our members, so that they can feel a little bit of empower that they have this kind of knowledge, and they will share that knowledge with other members in our community. So these are the things, and those are the basic and very small things that we have been doing since we started our network, and we have been doing this, and then we will continue doing more things. As I mentioned, as I told you, that we were informal network and we had many challenges of arranging a lot of logistic resources and so many things, but we are now formal, and we are trying to mold and shape our whole idea into formal, and we are trying to develop some other kind of training models, or let's say empowerment model to educate to migrant worker and to engage them into that our community work and something like that. So basically what we were doing was much more coming from the informal way, but now we are going into the formal, and we are trying to formalize whole idea, and it is now very crucial time for us to shape our whole idea that how we can support Nepalese migrant worker in terms of skilling and scaling of their capacity. So this is really big challenges for us, but I think we'll be able to develop some kind of module and some kind of training materials, or let's say a training to migrant workers, so that we can deliver that into Nepalese migrant worker, including all aspiring migrant worker who aspire to go to many other destinations, and the current migrant worker, and maybe those migrant worker who already have got their experience and skill they developed in the destination country. Then we can also utilize their skill and expertise to train the new aspiring migrant worker to go back to their to go to many other destinations. So yeah, these are the things that we have been doing, and please let me know if I answer you correctly, and if you want to have more clarity in some other parts, then I will be happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Wim. I think you have put us in a position to understand I think, quite clearly, you know, the role that the gap that you fill in, that I guess is not filled in then by, you know, private sector that we have heard, for instance, employees. Akhil was talking about the role of different stakeholders in skills development. And I think that what you've done is to kind of put us in this mode to say in the spaces where you don't see this happening, but even in the space, and I like what you have just shared in terms of taking that opportunity to share history, to give a sense of belonging to society. And I want to link it up to what Jennifer was talking about in terms of the soft skills. And sometimes I think, you know, like in all workplaces, there's something that happens when people feel that they are needed, that they are part of a team, that they are part of a project, a program, a workplace, that they are counted. There's something about those soft skills also being able to come out and thrive. And I think it's some very interesting work that you do. Now, I wanted to ask another question, and I think it was also very interesting to hear, for instance, the fact that other migrants, you know, who have already taken the step to enter into this job market or to understand what skills development look like, pass on information, but also a part of that training. And there is something about learning by, you know, learning from someone who has tried it before, in terms of just also providing leadership, but also inspiration. I'm thinking about one of the actions that's outlined in the GCM on this particular objective that talks about, you know, and that's objective I, if you could say that, action I rather. Under the objective, you've got a number of actions, and one of the actions says that, you know, basically countries committing to enhance the ability of migrant workers to transition from a job or employer to another by making available documentation that recognizes skills acquired on the job or through training in order to optimize the benefits of upskilling. Now, I'll put you a bit in the spot because I know that in the region in which you're operating, the kafala system has a lot to do with movement. So I wanted you to maybe just corner that in, that actually sometimes when the GCM, obviously it's a good ambition to have, and I think that's what we should have, that migrants should be able to move from one to another. But in this particular one, in the region that you work, just the fact that I have all the skills, actually the movement, because your visa or your work permit is actually tied to that employer. So I wanted you to talk to us a bit about some of the challenges, including just unpacking to us the kafala system, what that actually means in terms of bringing some of these objectives to life, and give us some examples maybe of, you know, skills requirements in some of the sectors of work, you know, where are migrants meeting these challenges as well. It would be good for us to hear a bit more. And, you know, and I asked you the question even when we had the exchange yesterday. I said, you know, are skills requirement and recognition, is it a necessity to perform the work, or is it a barrier to work?
Thank you very much for highlighting this issue and question, and I'll try to answer as far as my knowledge and experience allows me to do so. So basically, the required skill for migrant worker, if we talk about particular corridor between Nepal and the GCC and Malaysia, as we all know that most of the majority of the Nepalese migrant worker is going to most of the low skill and low paid jobs. So I think they also require particular skill, let's say maybe a carpentry, masonry, or electricity, you know, operating like electricity or something like that. But at the same time, if you'll be able to focus on the soft skill also, like the as Akhil also mentioned in his presentation before, that soft skill is the something that we can really focus on. And we are also, as a Shramik Sanjal and as a migrant worker, I also felt that the soft skill of Nepalese migrant worker is very low, including communication, you know, and there is a trend of semi-skilled migrant worker going to those job market and including cashier, you know, and customer service. Especially the hotel and hospitality services need that customer service for the global, you know, business operation and something like that. And if someone is going to the construction, they might need the health and safety training and something like that. So definitely we need to work on both the soft skill and the hard skill for the and identifying what is the need and identifying the real qualification of the aspiring migrant worker to go to and whether they are capable or not. So if we'll be able to design our training packages or module or the idea according to what they need, then it will be much more, I think, feasible and practical, especially talking about Nepalese migrant worker going to those major destination and major destination. So as far as your question related to the kafala system, and kafala system is concerned, that as we all know that the power differential between the employer and employee is protected by kafala system, though there has been a lot of progresses is being made and has been done. If you talk about Qatar, then Qatar has abolished the kafala system, and they are doing like the continuous, labor reform, and similar to other countries also reforming their the labor standard and labor law and something like that. But it hasn't definitely not reaches to those migrant workers who are working on the grassroots level, or the bottom of the pyramid, let's say. So, and there is power differential between the employer and employee, but there is a power differential between the state as well. Like the power of the destination country is very high. They are economically well off, they are economically developed, they have much more power than the sending countries. Like the country of origin of migrant worker is very less. So if we'll be able to we identify definitely, but if we'll be able to work on that agenda also to strengthen the capacity of the state of the origin of migrant worker, and be able to strengthen, and then if those two states work together to protect the migrant worker, then it will be much more easier. So there is, as I mentioned, the power differential between the employer and employee is very huge, and employee doesn't have much more choice of freedom of movement, and there has been still the cases of passport confiscation, not only to to change the job from one company to another company. So there is very still a practical challenges to transfer the job from one company to another company, even if I'm semi-skilled or I'm a skilled worker. So I have a couple of examples that couple of our fellow member wouldn't be able to change the job very easily, that they still had to issue the no objection certificate from their existing employer to another employer. And this is not easy because they are working with one company, and the company they are working, the employer they are working might not give the opportunity to transfer because they might be doing good to their company, or they might not be doing, they don't want to lose that. Maybe that is one, one factor. Or another factor, they might need to hire another person in maybe and pay higher salary, or the cost of the hiring or maybe paying the salary is much higher to have the similar, similar or the same capacity, same employee having the same capacity. So yeah, so there has been changes happen from the state level. There has been policy right place, but it has not been implemented so properly. And it applies not only to the low skill migrant worker, but also the skilled migrant worker. And yeah, that is the one very complex situation that every migrant worker, not only the migrant worker from the global south, but also maybe from the global north. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bim, on shedding light on that. And I think this is one of one of those objectives that needs another objective to be taken care of. As we have seen, I think with the GCM webinar series, and I think even for those who are living, lives as migrants, and even those of us who are engaging with migrants, we do see these interconnections, and indeed that GCM objectives are not sort of in silos, right? But then it also is true that they are a number of objectives that could, you know, kind of have a domino effect, if you like, in terms of a positive change. And I think this is one of those that's often talked about, and like legal pathways, for instance, as also Jennifer had pointed out before. So before we can even, for instance, talk about bilateral partnerships and programs and so on, these are also, you know, mechanisms in trying to move towards legal pathways. What does that look like? So thank you again in sharing your comments on that, on those questions. And now we're going to have an opportunity to engage with the audience. I see we already have a hand up, so thank you, Oluwa Yemisi, for raising your hand and sharing with us. And as we just ask our panelists to, if it's possible, to unmute your video or just join us back here on our virtual stage as we'll take some questions. Oluwa, do you want to come in? Olaitan, do you want to share with us? Okay, otherwise we start with Ngozi. Please go ahead, and then after that, let us have Oludare. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Tanya, your presentation was very, very nice. Yeah, I know that countries are closer to, nearer things are more related than things that are further apart. Like you mentioned, those nearer to Europe are taking care of us before those far away. But I think if the work in ICMPD should put in consideration also the gravity model, because some people from further areas, we have more flows from more populated countries coming up to the so-called global north. And in a country like Kosovo, which is less than 2 million, and also countries like Romania, which is less than 20 million, could not be compared with people migrating from countries like India, which is about 1.5 billion, and from Nigeria, which is about 200 million. And in the work you do you also put in consideration that you have migrants like refugees living in another country? So are they incorporated in work you do, like migrants in another country, you know? And how this, you said this is in a pilot stage, your project. So how do you now evaluate and measure the successes in order to strengthen it for the future? Yeah, thank you. Let me also go to, is it Dr. Axel, the man from India? Putting, you know, this GCM, they go hand in hand with each other. The last time we talked about discrimination, and now we are talking about skilling. So how do all this relate to the situation in Northeast India? I know that some researchers from India, they don't like to talk about it. They say it's a political issue, but political issues are also academic issues. We can discuss about them. So how do all this relate to the migrants in Nagaland, in Assam, in Mizoram, you know, bearing in mind the situation of their citizenship and documentation? Thank you.
May I go ahead, Paddy, and try? Yeah. Paddy, if you just nod at me, then I would.
Okay, so shall we see the possibility for us to just get a few questions, and
Sure,
then we
that's
do it through the tablet? So super, thanks, Jennifer. Oludare.
Hello, good afternoon from Nigeria. I'm sorry, my baby is with me. She's trying to. Thanks. My question is, I want to direct my questions to Jennifer, and I want to ask the relationship that our organization has with grassroots NGOs. I know she said that she works with the activities of our organization, also the coverage of of the activities of our organization also covers Nigeria. I don't know at what level the organization is working with in Nigeria. Is it at the federal government level? And if that is so, is there any relationship that, or any framework or structure that captures local NGOs in Nigeria that are working with potential migrants, giving them skills, equipping them with skills, or returning migrants in order to help them to settle down after coming back from Europe properly, equip them with skills, or those who are potential migrants, especially those who come from the marginalized, because many of the people that try to migrate away from Nigeria are those from the marginalized section of the society, the poor, the downtrodden, the ultra poor. What activities, what framework, what structure does our organization have to incorporate and work with these local NGOs who are helping, who are also very good actors in this area, and for them to be partners in progress with our organization in order to achieve the purpose and the mission of that organization? I don't know if you can hear me clearly where my baby is interrupting.
We heard you well. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And it was good to hear your baby in the background. Mr. Vese.
I want to believe today is Nigeria first, because the first speaker Nigeria, the second Nigeria, and here am I coming in Nigeria. Maybe because Nigeria was a punch match on topic of Jennifer. My contribution today will be on scaling. We're talking about scaling, and I want to ask or suggest, pathway as it may comes, how can the IOM, GCM, and the rest of the partners work on a purpose-driven scaling center? Like my last brother asked, having a skill acquisition center, maybe in country of origin, whereby returnees can come back and be relevant and valuable while they are coming back. Or like the last contributor said, purpose-driven training, whereby you send a migrant to a place that they work, not just everybody moving out without knowing what they want to go and do. How can IOM, GCM, and every other partners, UNESCO at large, come together to see to it that they establish a center in countries of origin and for this purpose? That's what I want to know.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. And we just make sure that we have many other countries that are here with us in the room. So please feel free to share with us. I also recognize that we have one of our vice presidents at JRFDT, Dr. Raj, is here with us, and the president of JRFDT, Professor Binod Kadria, is also here with us. And would you like to come on and share some reflections? Professor Binod?
Yes, sure, Paddy. Thank you. This has been a fascinating session and taking me back to my classroom. As I have said it before, this is about economics of education. This is about the economics of human capital. And that's where I think we need to connect the practice and the real world with the theory. And this is a certificate course, and this is an opportunity that we rekindle our brains, ourselves, in terms of, because this information, specific information or case studies that we have is ephemeral. It's not going to stay forever. It's going to change. We are in a dynamic world, and that's why, and technological change is continuous, and that's where we find that obsolescence, redundancy, and all these affect the skills that we build. The certification that we give, the certificates do not become relevant anymore. So I think we need to perhaps also pay attention to all these case studies that we got about Nigeria, about Nepal, about Assam, and northeast of India, those which are challenging thoughts, and in terms of connecting them through our academic lens is very, very important. And that's where I think that the issues are in terms of lags. The technology curriculum lag. Technology is a continuous process, but curriculum does not change every day. The change comes in leaps and bounds, and that's where we are important. And we have to be conscious of the fact of the barriers that you mentioned, Paddy. The barriers are not only technological, but they are man-made. They are man-made in the sense that there are monopolistic elements that drive not only the education market, but also the labor market. We want to create shortages so that we can derive monopolistic benefits, monopoly profits. And that is where there are self-regulating professions that do not allow other people to enter without crossing those barriers. And those barriers can be examinations, tests, qualifications, and so on. And this is a whole political economy of this. It is not as simplistic as we think about, and we need not go into, we will not be able to negotiate, come to the negotiating table unless we know the nuances of this. It begins right from home. It begins with learning by doing. It then goes into formal education and then on-the-job training, because on-the-job training is very, very important in vocational education. But we find that these lags continue to remain. And that's where they have to be bridged by not only equipping the global south, and I'm glad that you questioned the term global south. We can talk about that and perhaps think of alternatives, like I had suggested in one of my writings, calling them rising southern economies, RSEs rather than global south. So this is where I think we need to think together. And Jennifer is smiling. I could see that her inputs were so valuable in terms of enlightening us and inspiring us to think together. That, I think, is the hallmark of this particular session, that I can think in terms of how to bring these live examples in terms of our debates in theory, and bring them into the mainstream of the academics. So there are academics and activists. We need to bridge the gap that stays there between academics, because it is the academic argument which would live forever. And that is the tool that we must use for our activism. Thank you very much.
Professor Vinod, thank you very much for those reflections. I think that also take us out of the space of just understanding what qualifications are like. And I like one of the reflections that I had sort of seen highlighted around, one of the very first actions here talks about the recognition of foreign qualifications. And I remember with one speaker who's not here with us, we debated on the fact is, why do we call them foreign qualifications if we look at the globalization of education, and how, for instance, the University of Leeds is offering that course in another country altogether, and how that intersection, even between different countries sharing a lot of knowledge and experience and expertise, and indeed academic sources, but we still manage to differentiate. So thank you, I think, for bringing us out also into the bigger dimensions where this topic could indeed be expanded on. Dr. Raj?
Thank you very much. I missed all the presentations, but I think I'll just put in my 2 cents after listening for 5 minutes. Qualifications and recognition, I think, is very much driven by, again, the profit. Not only the monopolistic elements only, that's one way to say who will be paid how much. So if you categorize an occupation, or if you under categorize an occupation, you can justify why you have to pay less. For example, if you are trained as a doctor in another country in the south, and then you come to the north, those are not recognized because these are professional associations which will not let you come in. The fact that these are money-making and professions, doctors or legal profession, any accounting. So you have to put in a caveat. And the caveat, while you are allowed to come in because you have the qualifications, but you're not allowed to practice the same profession because you got your qualifications elsewhere. And once you underrate, I mean, that's what happened in South Africa, for example. Blacks were well qualified for a particular job, but they were categorized as either assistants or not professionals, so they could justify why the wages are lower for Blacks for the same profession. So we find that, and I mean, everyday encounters we have. I went to a doctor, I mean, to get my eyes tested, and this lady tested my eyes, but she was trained in the South. So I asked her, so are you an optician or optometrist? She says, well, I was. So I said, then what happened? But now I'm a technician. But you're doing the same job that the optometrist is going to do on my eyes. But when it comes to charging the insurance, you're not charging a technician's rate because she's not authorized to sign my prescription. So the doctor signs the prescription, but she does the job. So how much she gets paid as opposed to what the doctor. So in other words, professions which are driven by this, I mean, firstly, the barriers are created so you can keep the classes. You can show where you fit, okay? And yet you get the work done. And that happens in many countries in the North where, you know, and then you have to go back to school. And most women now, they say, well, I don't have the money or the time to go back to enroll or do 2 years program again. So I'm just fine, I will, you know. So what I'm saying is that accepting qualifications which are obtained elsewhere, not only underrates, that means you create stigma that if you're trained there, then you cannot really be qualified because you don't have either bedside manners or you don't have this, and these are all the excuses. Whether one can universalize a curriculum is not something that I advocate for, because the social situations in a country where you receive your education is very, the culture, the social, all aspects play into. And in any case, when we go to universities or schools or colleges, we are not training for others. We're training for our own situation because we're building human capital for our own and not exporting that. It's not some commodity that you have ordered and then you say, okay, I'll tailor-made it for you. So I think these are very, I think these are critical issues to reflect on, because this is not only, we are dealing with people, we are dealing with human capital, we're capacitating them, we are improving their capacities to respond to particular situations. So if they don't recognize, before you set your foot out of your country, they should have some way of mediating, checking your qualifications and saying, yeah, maybe you don't fit in there. And maybe when you go there, you will fit into that. And then it's your choice whether you want to undervalue but that doesn't happen. I think Canada tried to set up to get their immigration people or the departments review those qualifications. And then they found, well, you know, in the end, we don't control the labor market, right? You can say, yeah, you can certify and say, yes, the person is well qualified, but you don't control or regulate the labor market. So these are some of the challenging issues. And this brings me back, just 1 second and I'll stop, as to what is development for? To develop your country. So if sending countries don't have a framework to say, now we have X number of people who are trained, who have all the kind of knowledge and so on, how are we using them to develop ourselves so that we could reach this migration transition? Are there any plans for migration transition? In other words, is this Global South going to be an exporter without any plan how we can exit that into something where they can retain and build their country and develop their country? So I think, to me, this is a fundamental thing. Okay, the GCM is there, right, the compact. The compact assumes, or both the senders and the receiving countries assume, that the situation will remain static. In other words, the Global South will be always sending their people to the Global North to see what they can find. On the other hand, migration is not just south to north. Migration is more south to south. And therefore, alliances in the regional, at the regional level, to me, are more important than looking at if my education educational qualification is being recognized in Canada or in England and so on. Where are the regional alliances? You see, this is where I think this is something we need to not shy away from, because that's where the strength is. Okay, you built regional coalitions. Remember what Mahathir, the Malaysian Prime Minister, some years ago when he was Prime Minister said, when it was the IMF is choking these countries with all these conditions, they said, let's set up our own bank in the region. We don't need to go to the IMF. We can do it. That was a threat which could have been concretized. So in other words, let us recognize the power that the regions have in the global South. And let's consolidate and let's think through, okay, well, that's the challenge. Thanks very much. Sorry, beating about the bush.
Dr. Raj, no, Dr. Raj, you are spot on. You are spot on, I think, on some of the very critical issues that I highlighted as ambitions, in the Global Compact, this sort of interinstitutional networks, the role of the regions. And I think even some very critical examples you've talked about, why don't you just let me know what my skills, if my skills are recognized before the journeys begin? I think these are things that are outlined as ambitions that countries have taken themselves up for. But indeed, how many of the countries are kind of looking at the Global Compact and saying, yes, we'll get inspiration from best practices nearby, far away, and understanding what these political barriers, and I think man-made barriers, as Professor Binod has also laid out in front of us. So meaning that sometimes very ambitious, but then there are many other things at play. So thank you again for sharing your reflections. I think it's a good time for us to do a tour de table with our panelists, and maybe we start with Jennifer. Jennifer, shall we start with you? And then we have Bim and Akhil. We will leave you. We say that we save the best for last in this order, if that's okay with you, Akhil. So Jennifer, we start with you.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, I'm in a bureaucrat's role here today speaking, but I have an activist heart. So hearing what Raj and others said, it's really, I think it's quite fundamental to the discussions. Looking at some of the questions that were raised for me, if I could just maybe clarify that ICMPD is an international organization that works across a whole range of countries. But the program that I was talking about is the Migration Partnership Facility, which is the one that offers funding for these legal pathways. So ICMPD, for example, is in Nigeria. If you look on our website, you will find our local office there. We have a new center for skills that's opening in Enugu. There's a lot of different activities on the ground through the MPF. Outside of our legal migration, we also, as I mentioned, have a whole lot of migration partnership projects. And one is on human trafficking, and that links into civil society in Nigeria with Italy and Sweden, looking at the whole pathway of vulnerability. So it's a whole range of kinds of engagement. On the countries, the interest in legal pathways and piloting these new initiatives and testing the skills dimension, the priority countries are determined by the EU member states. And there's a whole range of criteria. It could be the overall migration management discussion on return and readmission. It could be cultural, historical affinities. It could be linguistic. It could just be strong diaspora and engagement with the business sector. It's a whole range of different kinds of interests. It could be that there's development programs, there's economic diplomacy. So there's not one factor. And while indeed those in the immediate neighborhood, particularly the southern neighborhood, have tended to be let's say the initial partners. It's also a question of African countries in particular, knowing what labor stock they have, knowing what they want to make available, knowing where they want the investment and communicating that more effectively to make the partnerships a little bit easier to get off the ground, because it is actually quite complex. So maybe I will stop with that, Patty. I don't want to avoid your question to me, which was around recognition of skills. I mean, if you look at EU member states, they open up certain pathways for different reasons, and many at least try to be responsive to where they see they have labor needs and gaps. But they use qualifications as a course control tool in order to open up these pathways. And actually behind qualifications are skills. And employers are actually much more concerned about skills than qualifications, but it's much more complex and labor intensive and messy. And so at a fundamental level, in the absence of these recognition schemes, in the absence of these complex labor mobility pilot schemes, qualifications and recognition have remained quite a barrier to entry. So hopefully with some of these pilot projects and some of these newer initiatives, we will see ways of overcoming that. But for now, it is a crude control mechanism that remains in place.
Thank you, Jennifer. Dim?
Yeah, thank you, Patty. Thank you very much for giving me this time again. And actually, I just wanted to reflect a couple of things that by saying the development agenda are, and especially when we talk about the migration and labor migration, are often overshadowed by the economic agenda, and we are mostly highlighting the economic contribution of the labor migration to the destination and to the country of origin by saying that this much of contribution to the GDP, this much of contribution to the economic development, and so forth and so on. And these are almost like always go around the economic agenda, but we haven't talked, I think, about the social and cultural aspect of the development dimension. And I think that is also one another part. Maybe it might not go into the skilling and scaling of the migrant worker and certification, like, you know, proper certification of the skilling and scaling, but ultimately it will give the sense of satisfaction to the migrant worker to enable them to express themselves. And I think that is one fundamental thing that I think we need to highlight and work on the cultural structure of the destination countries and the cultural structure of the country of origin. So where we can integrate that, you know, the cultural diversity into one, one bucket or one subject, so that we can have much more integrated system, and it will ultimately drive not only the economy of the country, but also the social cohesion and the social integrity. And that is what I, as a migrant worker, always feel, that there is a lack of social interaction, the cultural interaction, and we feel isolated and alienated by not only by the state, by the kafala system, but also by the community. I think the local community might need to also understand that what the migrant worker feel. I mean, like what migrant worker go through. And yeah, that is one thing I think we need to discuss around while we talk about skilling and scaling of the migrant worker. There is definitely the point of education. There is point of the vocational skill. There is point of the soft skill that we really need to definitely focus on that aspect also, which will give the direct benefit to the migrant worker, and they can excel their work in particular place when they work in a particular company or particular employer with particular organization. So they will definitely benefit them. But in a larger picture, if we'll be able to integrate that other dimension of development, then it will also help them to empower themselves, to express themselves. So yeah, yeah, that are my reflection, having all this discussion and having reflection from professors and other two presenters. Thank you, Patty.
Tim, thank you very much for sharing with us. Akhil.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite refreshing to hear from Dr. Raj and Dr. Khatria on, the critical evaluation of 21st century economic migration. Yeah, I mean, I also really feel that, it's a fact that the capital, the transnational capital actually, kind of controlling the labor migration in the 21st century. So we can actually think about this political economic framework. But, I always try to think, from an academic at the same time an activist perspective. In that way, when we think about immediate solutions, we always, when we think about practice, the partnership are always a solution that could serve some interest of the migrants at this time or this stage of migration. And partnership means, as I said as I said previously, it should serve the interest of all the parties. I mean, not more burden or should not be put on the countries of origin, that they should do the skilling and stuff, and they should they should prepare the migrants. The burden should be shared between all the stakeholders, especially between the countries of origin and countries of destination. And another thing, why when we think about the regional cooperation when it comes to scaling, like harmonization of skills and all, there is a classic example of what happened with SARC when they tried to, kind of build, like harmonize the scaling, etc., in the SARC region. But that didn't happen, and that was a total failure. The Agenda 21 on skills. So we can see that there are examples of failures when they try attempt regional cooperation, etc. So it's important to build on that. I mean, it's important to understand the failures. And yeah, I mean, that's all for me now. And I have a few comments on what Jennifer said. Yeah, I think time is already yeah, past. So I would like to stop here. Thanks for all your reflection and comments.
Well, with us having taken a little bit more time than we had requested our panelists and also the audience to be here for, I think it's a good place for us to stop, but hopefully that the reflections do not stop here. And we have an opportunity, I think, not just in the space of global discussions around this particular issue in the context of GCM 18, on skills development and recognition, and also understanding that it's a very important, we have some important calendar dates in May for the IMRF, where some of these discussions and how, countries will come up with, I guess, a bit of a show of best practices, a lot of discussions, hopefully that will also touch on the challenges. And I think that's what we tried to do today in terms of sort of saying, what do we see as this disconnect between the global ambitions that we have in the Global Compact and what is happening on the ground, and how do these meet? Because yes, indeed, as non-binding as the GCM may be, it still is important in terms of bringing countries together to try and come up with solutions together for not what we would call a challenge, but what we have as an opportunity in most cases in terms of improving livelihoods for those who have left home, whether they have been forced to leave home or whether they have taken the journeys on their own voluntarily. But still the challenges remain the same in the space of skills development and recognition. And many thanks to the panel here that have helped us to dive into a lot of this these issues. I think we have indeed established that there is a wider ecosystem in terms of actors, priorities and partners, but also in terms of issues, challenges, and a wide range of opportunities that we have also heard from the floor in terms of what we can do in the space that we, where we're seeing the gaps. So we hope that also for the students and the participants within your workspaces, within your areas of research, that we can open our eyes, I think, to places where we see how do we fill the gaps. We can't sit and feel challenged because problems where we see them have to be approached with an open eye, an open mind. And as others have said, examples of best practices or examples of how others have thrived are there to inspire us. So we leave on that note, and many thanks again to Jennifer, to Akhil, and to Bim for joining us from your different locations, but also many thanks to the students who join us and are dedicated to the program, friends of the various organizations. Many thanks to Professor Binod and Dr. Raj and many others who join us and provide a lot of wisdom, a lot of engaging content, so that our discussions are not just filled with patting ourselves on the back, but also ask us to speak, to think about that wider ecosystem and that wider space on this discussion. We are back on Thursday, tackling GCM 19, and we are really looking forward. Our panel is nearly there, nearly ready. We're actually almost collapsing because we have too many panelists, but we have to make sure that we make do. But we're really glad and very happy for the support that we're getting from friends of the various organizations through the panelists that join us, that dedicate time to prepare and to engage with the audience. And so we're looking forward to seeing you on Thursday. Be reminded that the time is 1 p.m. and not 3 p.m. And then we're back again next Tuesday at 3 p.m. And as usual, we share all the information on the various social media for JRFDT and the other organizations. So on this note, would like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to our friends in Asia Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.